And we're back with hour number 3 of the Nutrimedical Report. And by the way, it's Clay and Iron Show. You'll be starting to see lots of news show up at Clay and Iron. If you haven't looked on the front page of Nutrimedical, you'll see the radiation detection site. Vista, California is there. We have a site operational now in Portland, Ashland, Oregon with Jeff Rentz. We have Pacifica, California with David Crane, myself. Our site's up at our class. We have also a site going to go up in Colorado, and one we're looking at also in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. You need to know that we're going to have actual live data being pushed forward every 10 minutes with a graph. The situation worldwide, we have Tim Alexander with some major developments. I want to pose for the very start, though. Yesterday I had Keith Davies on from Shubat.com and their site, and they tried to propose that there was a backroom deal between Turkey and Iran that would try to back Iran away from support of Syria, which I think is total garbage. And secondly, the Russians aren't going to back away, even if Iran did. With the only port that Russia has in the Middle East, I see the re-emergence of the Soviet Union and Russia's power by the masterful Mr. Lavrov and the king of masters in terms of geopolitical arrangements, which doesn't drink vodka, Mr. Vladimir Putin. The superstar, if you want to call it, of international politics is being painted by our stupid media as a czar and a terrorist. In actual fact, has been the king of common sense and restraint, considering that the Slaviansk people continue to be shelled, schools and people, hundreds have died, including many children.
Yeah,
I think it's only
Dr. Bill, it's still up in the air whether the so-called ceasefire, and I mean so-called, will be extended after tomorrow. They almost canceled the junta almost canceled it because their helicopter got shot down. But what the mainstream media didn't tell people about that shooting down of that transport helicopter is it was landing and taking off from a hilltop location where the junta's artillery was in place and firing down on the city. A lot of people are gone, but it was a couple 100,000 population. They just destroyed the city. And it probably was resupplying that artillery base with artillery shells.
Right. So the fact is that
flying some people off, maybe that were wounded or whatever. But so when they shot it down, 9 were killed. Now, first off, all day long and night they were engaged in shelling that city. So that's one hell of a ceasefire. And I would certainly think that the self-defense forces were within their right to shoot down anything in the vicinity of that artillery base.
You made an interesting comment just before the show about the comment of our foreign minister, and it was obscene. I call it Yiddish Eastern terrorist thuggish behavior. Yeah. And the comment, I want you to, and this is your terms, by the way, these are your terms. Yeah. Tell us what the comment was.
The Secretary of State, Kerry, who, when he ran for, president or vice president, was shocked to find out that he was really Jewish. Of course, his brother was a practicing Orthodox Jew. But anyway, if you believe that, I'm sure he's got a bridge in Brooklyn he can sell you real cheap. But he has given Russia, he has demanded that Russia, within hours, begin the process of disarming the self-defense forces. That's the only people that are stopping the fascists from rolling in to the areas where a lot of Russian-speaking people are. And, the way I describe that as more Yiddish ghetto criminal behavior coming from the West. Damn shameful. And it really is. That's not taken in the context of what's going on. That is shocking and shameful for an American Secretary of State. And it simply reflects the fact that the American people no longer even remotely have control of their government. It's being run by the global banking cartel families and Netanyahu and the extreme Zionists. And the behavior of this country is very shameful. I had lunch with a friend of mine yesterday, and he said he is so absolutely ashamed of the American government's behavior. He's thinking about leaving the country because it just it's just over the top. I mean, we're supporting literally people that walk around, give the Nazi salute. We're supporting extreme Zionists that if you're not born of a Jewish mother, you're not a human being. All that kind of crazy stuff. We overthrew the elected government, far from perfect elected government, but still the elected government in Ukraine, and put in the oligarchs. The president now is a Jewish oligarch, as are a couple of the governors. When I say oligarchs, I mean they stole everything, including that which was nailed down. Their behavior is totally criminal, and of course, and the president is also deeply linked to the Rothschild central banking empire, as is his prime minister. And of course, they're both dual citizens in Israel. That kind of behavior to support that is it's criminal. We are literally on the verge of the Third World War, and have been for about a month and a half now because of this foolishness. The American people don't support it. We're at war in who knows how many different countries. We're killing people, or drones are killing people. The country has gone to hell. We've got about 100 million people out of work, and yet we continue to spend billions and trillions on wars that we have no business being in, and in fact, every business being not in. It's shameful. It's immoral to the max.
Right, and the fact is we're stupid enough. The problem is like Einstein's statement I've been mentioning over and over again the last few weeks. Evil people will not destroy the world, but people who see the evil being done and do nothing, that will destroy the world. So it's our listeners, it's our people out there, it's the people that are being tweaked to push our congressmen and senators and anybody, local politicians. The average person in the street that just needs to get enraged over this. And if the average person gets enraged, it's over.
Yeah, because we are many, and they are not even tiny. I mean, when you consider that if you're talking about the global banking cartel, at the apex there's the Rothschilds and 8 families. A little bit further down in terms of global control, there's 30 families. Between their senior operatives, their minions, and themselves, 8,000, maybe 10,000 people at the most. And there's, 7 billion plus people on this planet, and we're allowing the worst demonic, evil trash to control us. For instance, here's a good example, a poll just out. 74% of the people in Germany are opposed to expanding NATO and putting permanent bases in Poland and the Baltic states as a so-called buffer against Russia. 74% makes no difference. It wouldn't make a difference if it was 100%, because the German people don't control Germany, the people in France don't control France, the people in the United Kingdom don't control the United Kingdom, and the people in America sure as hell don't control America anymore.
Right.
And in fact, I've heard a number of people say, and I think I'm right there with them, I'm probably not going to bother to vote unless I can be convinced that my vote will count, because with computerized voting, it's a scam. There's no trail. He who controls the source code controls the outcome of the election, and we don't even have a real choice anyway. I saw on the internet a bumper sticker, and I about gagged when I saw it. At the top was Hillary Clinton, and the running mate was Michelle Obama.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. It's like, please shoot me, somebody, I mean, give me a break. So this is where we're at. We don't even have a choice between tiddly-dee and twiddly-dum. We have a choice between this witch and that witch. And we have a president that we don't even know his real name. We don't know where he was born, who his mother was, who his father was, what citizenship he holds. It's one thing after another. We are in an upside-down world because we have allowed the criminal trash to take over, and we better wake up and reclaim it, or we're all going to die in World War III.
Yeah, it's coming real quick. We're talking about the extreme statements are being made out of the box right now. Welcome back, and we have tons of news to go through, Tim. As I say, miles and miles.
Let's take
remember
a
that saying,
detour.
miles and miles before I sleep?
I want to cover what's happening not just in the Ukraine, because we've done that, but also in Iraq. But we need to cover this Ebola thing, because the World Health Organization has just come out and said a drastic action is, urgently needed to stop the Ebola outbreak. Now, you and I both know that Ebola came from an advanced biowar lab.
Right.
And I keep telling people, you got to step way back from the forest and look at the pattern from the trees and even the forest, and look at the pattern in the forest. And that's kind of what an analyst does. You look for patterns.
Right.
Well, you have a number of new viruses that have sprung up in the last couple decades. And, gee, what a coinky-dinky, what a coincidence, because it just happens to come at the time when the first period in human history, at least that we know of, that mankind is able to do genetic engineering, to take snippets of DNA from one virus and add to another and another and create a brand new virus. And Ebola clearly, as Ebola hemorrhagic fever, as is Marburg hemorrhagic fever, were man-engineered viruses. There are a number of others like MERS.
Right. In fact,
there's a pig virus that's
PRV. It's called pig virus. And by the way, when they start doing recombinant research to create multi-organ transplants, it's at Dr. Seed, who's a physicist in Chicago, where they grow pigs that are 90% genetically identical to the host, because they grow the pig directly as in a sense, a what's called a recombinant, so that they actually contain mixed cells in the embryo from human to pig. So when they grow it, it's actually part pig, part human, and then they can do multi-organ transplants because the
which is an offense against God. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Mixed histocompatibility locus antigens, which are the MHC, are identical, so your body doesn't reject it. And I've got a report here from Recombinomics. It's 11-week sustained MERS transmission from Jeddah, Saudi Arabia to Tehran, and they have the report from the Tehran University of Medical Sciences releasing the partial gene and gene sequences. This plague is spreading. In fact, it's more serious, I think, than Ebola. Ebola is so deadly. Although the World Health Organization is raising the flag on Ebola, it's just basically local. It's killing people like crazy in Africa, and they have horrible hygiene. Well,
they can turn it down,
but here's the problem.
It's
so lethal, though, that it doesn't get a chance to spread. You see, the viruses that kill the most people are not the most lethal. They have the longest incubation periods and the most viral shedding, so they can infect other people.
I know. But
and then they pop up, and all of a sudden,
Ebola, and they can. I'm sure somewhere in multiple advanced biowar labs, there are examples of Ebola that have already been tweaked that will do exactly that.
Right,
just
exactly.
Sitting on the shelf in a cryogenic freezer, just waiting to be pulled out.
Right. Now, here's what I think will happen. You're going to see one or more of these viruses pop out. We looked at the exponential recombinant curve for the SARS-MERS virus, the beta coronavirus 2, called the MERS, or Middle Eastern Respiratory Virus. And according to Ann Morrison and others, looking at the rate of growth by the fall or early next winter.
Ann is a very smart lady. Go ahead.
Well, by the fall or early next winter, we're going to probably be seeing at least hundreds of thousands of cases, and very shortly millions of cases by next spring or summer that will be popping up in America. This is what's called the exponential expansion of it, which means by next spring we're probably going to have some pretty big problems. That's just MERS. Then we have, of course, the H7N9, which hasn't leaped from China yet, but it's spread all over Asia. H7N9 is the most rapidly multiplying virus flu virus in human history. We have H5N1 that's been percolating for a decade now, since 1997 when it popped up first, and it started to really show up in 2004-05. So by 2006, they passed international laws through the World Health Organization and the United Nations that every nation is signed to hand over their health care and their military in the case of a pandemic airborne virus, which could be either the avian flu, the swine flu, MERS, coronavirus, Ebola, or any other airborne, multinational plague. So those things are in place for the WHO and the United Nations to take over even the military and the healthcare system. And this is not a joke. This is treaties have been passed already in 2006, signed by virtually every nation on Earth.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, they on one hand, these nations, particularly the smaller ones that aren't big players, they say, oh my God, we've got to sign this. On the other hand, if they do, they're signing their rights away into the people that basically created the virus in the first place. Let me tell you what I said about the World Health Organization statement today about drastic action needed. I said Ebola came from and this is on my site, Europe. Ebola came from an advanced bio-war lab. It was genetically engineered. From time to time, it is released in rural areas as a test and to keep it in front of the public for later use. Now it is in pre-pandemic mode. It is being readied for use in a global epidemic to be tied into a global economic collapse and or to World War III with a cover that it is a natural event. Remember, if advanced bio-war hits, the total self-quarantine inside your home is the only way to ensure that you will survive. That means you need to have the food, water, and full supplies to survive for months without leaving the house or let anyone or anything in. And never allow the government to force an RFID chip or any other mark of the beast on you to, quote, ensure that you're disease-free, end quote, or that quote, you have been vaccinated, end quote, and don't take their fake vaccines.
Yeah, exactly. And, of course, we're going to bring Mayor Ines on to talk about your rights for vaccines because the states are trying to literally make statements that, quote, dissolve your rights by trying to do I'll call flim-flammerization. The medical system, by the way...
you know what? My fat body belongs to me, not to the state. And no jerk in Washington or any place else is going to tell me I have to take a vaccine if I don't want to take it. And they better lock and load because I'll be locked and loaded. You're not shoving something in me when I say no.
Well, I hear this with what I call the toxic docs. They try to shove in toxic vaccines, toxic tests that don't need to be done, toxic unnecessary surgical procedures. I mean, it really is pretty dangerous. I mean, I just recently read the report about one of our top baseball stars here at the Padres here in San Diego, and he died of a salivary gland tumor at 54. Well, you know damn well that the toxic docs had their paws on him. You know darn well they gave him radiation therapy, which destroyed his brain, his vasculature. They gave him toxic chemotherapy, which is paid by numbers. I learned of a case,
Dr. Bell, where a person had an advanced case of skin melanoma, one area that had basically eaten through to the bone, and they used organic hemp oil on it, and within a few weeks, not only was that site cured, but the person had no cancer.
Yeah, well, you know, that's not unusual at all to see that kind of situation. But Big Pharma can't do that. Well, no, here's the situation. The gene switch issue is really important. That's what the Brzezinski Clinic is doing. I contacted Dr. Greg this morning to get him back on. The FDA doing research with him because a number of other clinics trying to get in on the business, but they want to kind of edge in and take over all the research after all the persecution of Dr. Stanislaw Brzezinski. Cancer is a gene switch problem, not an immune problem. And this paint by number chemo is nuts. Welcome back to the Nutrimedical Report. We're joined now with Chris Harris, and I want to read the very first report. And I'm not going to steal your thunder because I know you have tons of stories, but we've been getting an E&E News 2 weeks in a row now. And of course, the latest is a report quoting you, Mr. Chris Harris, former licensed senior reactor operator and engineer, June 19th, 3:35 p.m. I do believe that part about it being a hydrogen explosion at WIPP due to decomposition of the green kitty litter that causes a whole bunch of problems, and one of them is that this is a huge dirty bomb. And I need to very immediately and scientifically and technically correct that. This wasn't what your intention was, because a hydrogen explosion doesn't create just exploding nuclear waste like plutonium and americium. It literally creates a nuclear explosion, which is plutonium then becomes detonated to create a nuclear flash of neutrons, a neutron flux, and a small nuclear explosion. It's like years ago, I listened to a report where a scientist was in the Los Alamos reactor area. He was playing around with a ball, literally with a large ball of radioactive plutonium. And he thought it was a smart idea to take a typical regular hardware store hammer and to tap the plutonium. And all of a sudden, with his little glasses on, he had these glasses on to protect his eyes, he saw a big flash. That flash is what's called a neutron flux. And within 48 hours, his bone marrow crashed, He was succumbed with massive infections in every corner of his body, and he immediately collapsed and died. Now, that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about just a dirty bomb. We're talking about a hydrogen-generated nuclear explosion. And these are going to continue to pop underground and above ground because they have hydrogen being generated by the plutonium, by the zirconium cladding on the fuel rod assembly bundles that generates tritium, deuterium, and hydrogen, which will create hydrogen explosions, and that explosion will push the critical mass together to create small, and or not so small, nuclear explosions. This is not just a dirty bomb. So, Chris, I'd like you to clarify that. Maybe they can get this on their E&E News. They need to know these are much bigger and much nastier than just a hydrogen explosion that's going to blow some nuclear waste around. This also will turn much of this material to what's called a nanoparticle vapor, which means it's going to be injected into the troposphere and spread around the planet, not just locally at the WIPP reactor. It's going to go downwind and eventually get injected into the high atmosphere around the entire planet.
Oh, Dr. Bill, I mean, it's actually, I thank E&E News for picking up that, even though it is kind of weird to see what you say.
We just want to clarify. They're doing their best job, but we want to clarify this because we need to clarify these issues, especially when you get large amounts of nuclear material, like around not only there but Hanford. You don't just have a little americium, a little plutonium, or around the Rocky Flats facility where I took care of employees working there doing work for NOVA, doing testing. And we found after they did their sampling of water, etc., it was 10,000 to 1 million plus times more radioactive than they thought. And they realized after they had done their water, ground, and air sampling that they should have been walking around in radiation hazmat suits. And they had a chain link fence with people literally hiking around the area where the deer were playing and people were kind of just gaily walking around trying to get fresh air, sunshine, and their little dose of local plutonium.
We in the industry call that fence a HEPA fence instead of the HEPA filter that actually removes a high energy or high efficiency filter that removes particulates. All they have around there is a HEPA chain link fence, which obviously doesn't do anything.
HEPA fence, that's pretty funny, HEPA fence.
Yeah, at least that's what we call it. There's nothing between the plutonium and us but a HEPA fence.
There's one other thing. The false sense of security and imagination that the government really does care for them. As I've said many times, they care for them to death.
Well, yeah,
they love them to death.
What's the fence there? Of course they care for us.
I knew you'd get a little enraged. I'm
trying to be quiet. I just can't.
You can't be quiet when you hear that kind of stuff. So let's talk about that. Now we got the WIPP reactor. This is like so bizarre. It literally, I don't know. Jimmy Kimmel needs to pick this up and make some jokes about it. Jimmy Kimmel, okay? On his late night TV show, because I'm sure he can make some green kitty litter jokes that are going to go on for weeks. He can continue poking at this every show, and people are going to continually get entertained and laugh their heads off, and eventually they're going to say, "Oh, why does he keep on poking at this? Maybe we should research. Oh my God, it's real. They actually changed to green kitty litter, and these are bombs." In all these radioactive sites, like our old nuclear weapon sites, where we actually turn to green kitty litter to make actually hydrogen and critical nuclear explosion bombs. Ooh, is that bad for us or good? Let's see now. There's a yes, no question, not multiple choice. There's a yes or no answer. That's correct. Damn it. So, Chris, tell us what, really. It's in Hanford. God knows how many other sites. The Department of Energy under the Abominator and his bunch of Yahoo idiots that run this government. Basically, we don't really have a federal government. We got a proxy globalist government. They're too busy just trying to do evil, stupid stuff that they can't manage the government worse than they possibly could. They actually have the anti-Midas touch. It turns to fecal matter everything they touch. Nuclear reactors, no. Old kitty litter's no good. Let's go green. Green sounds good. Let's go to green kitty litter. Turn them into bombs.
Well, we did discuss, that there is a wide array of criticality events, and really, I guess what they picked up on was, I guess a lesser event would be just a mild case. It would be just a really bad dirty bomb, and then, of course, as you discussed, depending upon what's in the containers themselves, fissile material and all could be compressed, and you could actually get a more severe criticality. I'm not going to say prompt critical because it all depends on...
Well, we don't know. Every bomb is going to be different.
Well,
One would be a small... Exactly. But the point is there's a potential for a critical reaction and a nuclear flux. Now, what's happening, and the best way to tell that this is really going on, is to actually fly over or put a drone over the Fukushima site, or even look for miles away if you're in a commercial airliner, and just look out your window. And if you see little blue streaks, that's the neutron flux, literally frying little nitrogen atoms in the atmosphere, especially at sundown, or as soon as it turns dark, and you're going to see blue streaks like a laser light show at a rock band concert. Those little blue streaks are neutron fluxes coming from the ground or below the ground because a critical reaction's occurred and nuclear material saying, hello, neutrons, let's do a little dance called chain reaction. It's like a do-si-do Texas dance, like the Texas two-step. Only when you release more neutrons, you get a big flux beam, and it shoots up through the air and fries neutrons 30, 40, 50, 60 miles into the air until there's no more air. And then when the nitrogen atoms are so far apart you can't see it, those nitrogen atoms are telling you there's been a neutron flux shooting into the atmosphere at all angles. So that means we're having critical reactions underground at Fukushima. So if anybody wants to just kind of say, hey, pilots, if you're flying near Fukushima 100 miles away, did you ever see any blue streaks in the sky? And if they do, they'll say, yeah, I saw some blue streaks. It looked kind of weird. And it's because there's neutron fluxes shooting neutrons through nitrogen at night, making a blue line.
I was wondering, do you suppose there are astronauts or astronomers on other planets looking at Earth saying, wow, look at that, there's another flash of blue light again. I wonder what they're doing down there.
Yeah, exactly. No,
actually, Earthlings doing
our space station could see it. Our space, if we have what's called these high resolution imaging satellites like the Google satellite. I don't know if people can look down with Google. If you can look at Google Earth and you can look at Fukushima or even near the adjacent area, you should be able to look at Google Earth, especially at night, and be able to see blue streaks. I'm asking people out there, if you can find it, send me the links, send me the pictures. But I'll guarantee you, if you actually look down with Google Earth at night, you should see blue streaks coming out of Fukushima. Interesting, hey?
Well, here's the scary part. If you're seeing blue streaks, that means that your optic nerve is picking that up. In other words, it's going into your brain.
Well, not if you're seeing an image on a computer screen. It's only if you're actually up in the sky.
Yeah, if you're there. If you're flying in a plane, for instance.
I did an analogy last week for the last half hour about a 12-year-old boy I was trying to help that they'd moved back to Fukushima that was basically very ill, couldn't grow, etc. And that meant so your stomach will burn. So just a couple of headlines that I posted up today so you can have a look at it. Fukushima radiation causing Japan bird deformities. Radiation pouring into the sea from layers 80 feet down. Radioactive water now 80 feet underground at Fukushima. TEPCO begins decon of R3 first floor robots. Burst defects in West Coast states hit record. You've got a bunch of headlines too, Chris. I want you to go through yours because these are very shocking. They're well researched and they're real. And but if people want to know about them, they need to start getting informed. This gentleman, his name is Sonny, came from Doctor's Data, came over to my place to help me with David Crane set up our radiation site. Turned out he was on the Ronald Reagan between 2007 and 2009. He said, I'm not worried about the radiation when I told him about the gamma detection site. I said, really? I said, well, the Ronald Reagan got blasted with 3 plumes of radiation. Now the ship, they're thinking about sinking it after trying to decon it and spending many millions of dollars to try to decontaminate it and replace the equipment, strip it all away from all of its electronic controls to its pipes and air tube systems and everything. And I said, now they've realized they can't decontaminate it, so they're going to sink it. And much of the crew has already died or is in the process of dying from radiation poisoning. By the way, if you're out there, I will provide you free consultations to help you decon and to rescue your tissues and get your stem cells going. Most of these people should have a bone marrow stored in a bone marrow bank. Well, they still have some immune system left in case they need to do a bone marrow transplant. They should also have their bone marrows of their relatives typed in case they need an emergency bone marrow transplant. I can give them all the proper medical things that need to be done, as well as the rescue of nutraceuticals and the technologies to help stimulate their body to try to heal from this damage. But the fact is that after I told him this, he kind of a little freaked out a little bit and realized, like, this is not funny. We're generating real data. If there's a surge in cesium-137, because we're only looking at gamma, you need to be aware the government's not going to tell you, we are. And we're not going to try to fiddle data. We're not conspiracy theorists. We're not here fear-mongering to try to create something out of nothing. If it doesn't surge, it doesn't surge. But if it continues to trend upward over the next few years, that's bad. Because it's going to bioaccumulate not just in our little detector, but in your bodies. And it'll be in your food, in your meat especially, because it's higher end in the food chain, which is one of the reasons why I stopped eating meat. And I eat only fish now from the Atlantic Ocean, not Pacific, and not filter feeders like scallops or mussels. People need to be aware we're in deep doo-doo, and this is not a joke. This is not a joke, and this is not to be played with or pretended or I know more. When I said I was a nuclear division with the American College of Occupational Environmental Medicine, and I took care of plants in Savannah River, plutonium detonators, a reactor source in Chicago and Rocky Flats, it shut him up real quick. He realized I was not a novice with a background in nuclear toxicology and physics. He realized that he was talking to someone who was not going to just kind of be blown off by a kind of a, you know, I call it an ad hominem statement of, well, I'm not worried. Well, you don't need to be worried right now. You need to be aware. How about don't worry, become aware? How's that? So, Chris, let's go through your list. You have a good long list of news items I want you to go through here. You got a bunch of them.
Oh, well, first of all, I just wanted to thank you for offering such good help to our sailors, and that's great. Also, I guess the ALPS system is finally back in service again. The ALPS, the Advanced Liquid Process System at Fukushima, that is now capable of scrubbing after 3.5 years, scrubbing strontium out. But
great news.
Well, it's good news, except the one thing is I really challenge the reliability of that system and how long will it run for.
Well, they need to have redundancy, backups, and alternative ways. And they need to also problem solve, like a NASA mission, the probable places where the system will break down in the near or far future. And they need to start problem solving those before they happen. That's how you run a system, so you've got backups, problem-solving, redundancy, etc., so that when these things happen, that's why I tell people most things that happen bad are not accidents, they're on purposes. Whether it's someone who doesn't exercise and eats garbage, or someone who runs a nuclear plant and has the water line for the high water line above the water intake for the diesel fuel generators, or they have seismic activity and they don't go and retest the welds and the structural integrity of the reactor, or check to see how thick the pipes are after they've been scrubbing them out for 20 years, and they're now down to a tissue paper thin, which they discovered in Chicago at one of the big plants up there a few years ago. This is just what I call stupid on steroids. And if they actually problem-solved these things, worked it out with redundancies, we wouldn't have these disasters because these people are just plain lazy. So let's go on. We've got TEPCO, decommissioning of the plant, Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant. What have you been talking about decommissioning? How can they decommission a plant that they don't even have control of? What's going on there?
Yeah,
they got two-thirds of the fuel rod assemblies are pulled out, but that's the easy stuff. The hard work starts next. And the fuel assembly number 4 is not even a common pool. Or the real problems were reactor 1, 2, and 3, where they can't even get a robot near it or it'll fry it.
That is correct. They cannot even get a robot in there. And I sent you some information on the types of robots that they're going to attempt to use for decontamination efforts, so that they can one day come closer to getting people in there. And of course, decontamination and shielding.
Yeah, but if you use
guys, let me ask a question here. May sound stupid, but are you telling me that they can't take a robot and put all kind of lead shielding on it and use it? It's that bad?
Lead's not enough. You need to put depleted uranium shielding to shield the gamma, which will fry the integrated chips, and neutron flux. The neutron flux changes the crystal structure of the silicon wafer. The only chips that work are ferromagnetic, which they don't want to tell you about from Atmel Corporation because they're classified. They're tri-triple-prong ferromagnetic chips. They're better than the tubes that the Russians use for their Tupolev long-range jets and their other aircraft that are we call EMP resistant. But they're also neutron flux and neutron flux as well as electromagnetic pulse and gamma resistant. So that's the problem. What they should be doing is putting cabled robots that were using fiber optics. They could go in there. If they use small robots, they could start moving the debris around. I don't think they should be extracting anything. They need to do two things. Their enemies are neutrons and water. So they need to put a starlight, and I'm putting this in my report, which will be ready here very shortly and ready to go to everybody. I sent a rough draft of it in the last newsletter last weekend, and unfortunately the pictures didn't come through. But you'll see an expanded version of that with all the references and all our emails back and forth for 3.5 years in the DVD, which I'm hoping will be ready before the 4th of July. Because we as Americans, and we've already heard this story, we're going to actually get a tab from the Japanese and TEPCO for the destruction of this plant for fixing it up, because we're in the tailpipe of this mess. And they're going to hand it over to America and say, yeah, it's your mess now, you got to clean it up, America. It turns out virtually all the contractors that are working under the umbrella of TEPCO are American contractors, including the company that set up the kitty litter mess and the WIPP reactor. The same idiots were involved as one of the contractors for TEPCO. Crazy. So, Chris, some more news. You mentioned Kyushu Electric submits documents for reactor safety checks. You've got a report here, recent topics, robots usher in new phase of cleanup.
And if you look at the one right beneath that one also, those documents are being challenged heavily by the Nuclear Regulatory Agency in Japan. In fact, the harsh criticism to the TEPCO and the other companies that want to go ahead, and I'll tell you exactly where the specifics are in the seismic responses of the plant itself. They're being challenged on the adequacy of the preparations for a very large earthquake, which of course can happen. I mean, we just had one in Alaska.
Right, we had a 9.0, and by the way, it goes clockwise around the Ring of Fire. So they had one, I think, 3 or 4 weeks ago in Japan. That was the biggest one since March 11th, 2011, and we know that a big quake's coming, which means that the structure of the plant is reduced because there's subsidence, because there's neutron fluxes which change the crystal structure of the metals and plastics of the building, so they structurally don't have the same crystal we call integrity that they had in the past. We know that the plant has had major annealing of things like the seals around the cooling pools, etc. All these issues mean, as they say in the movie, with Moby Dick, there she blows. It's going to blow one of these days. And that's why we have our gamma detectors up, because we can't rely on the idiot government. We got to do it ourselves and pay for it ourselves, because we can't rely on a government that's so corrupt. They want to put nuclear reactors with old technology and call it green. This is the idiot with Obama, and put kitty litter that turns nuclear waste into bombs.
Yeah, but it was green.
You know what? These guys would be good if they're writing scripts for SNL, Saturday Night Live, or Jimmy Kimmel, but they shouldn't be running the government.